So welcome back to another new project car that I've acquired, a 2000 Mustang with a V6. I have a bad starter, as you could hear from the last video I just played, that clicking noise, and then after you hit it a few times it will eventually start. So quick lesson on what's happening. That clicking noise that you're hearing is this solenoid right here, which means that this is getting power and this is still getting power and everything's functioning. So I don't need to go through and diagnose that part of it. I know it has power because it works eventually. But what's happening is there's a bad spot in the armature of the brushes somewhere in this motor. So this thing hits hard enough that it will kind of rotate that armature to a spot where it hits a good point in the brushes and then eventually turns. The same principle. So if you have somebody holding this and you hit this part with a hammer and it starts, this is your problem. So that's my diagnosis. I haven't even crawled under the car, but I know that this is the issue, so I got a new one. So I have my first safety precaution in place. Got a brick on each side of the tire. The next one is going to be making sure this thing is in neutral. Worst case scenario, we don't want the car starting, and if it does, well, can't go anywhere. So the next safety precaution is we can't have our terminal shorting out when we're taking off the starter underneath the car. So I'm going to remove the negative battery terminal from the battery. Stuff that down here in the corner. And we only need to do the negative, so we'll leave the positive alone. Don't hurt anything. So now that I have my bricks, it's in neutral, battery disconnected, I can now jack up the car. I'm going to go for the center of the K-frame right under the motor. Make sure you're not on the oil pan. And this will get both sides up evenly. So next we always want to put jack stands under it in case the hydraulic part of the jack fails. If you have arrows and a pinch weld, you want to put the floor jack there. As you can see, this one's kind of banged up a little bit. So I'm going to go for the frame rail. So when in doubt, always use the frame rail. It's stronger than a pinch weld anyway, and usually has less rust on it. And now we want to give the car a shake because we would rather have it fall right now rather than on top of me. And it's pretty solid. So now I'm crawling under just to kind of scope out what's going on. First of all, double checking my lift points. It's solid, and that's solid, so we're good. We're safe to work underneath here. There we go. Starter is on the passenger side of the car, just like I suspected. So when I take this off, I'm going to watch to make sure it's not going to twist that ground wire, because it usually does. See how it's twisting the other bolt with it and twisting that wire? I need to hold this nut and break it off of that stud. So I need to stop what I'm doing here before this gets worse. So I want to try a wrench first, but a lot of times they're too fat to fit between the flange and the wire, which is exactly what's happening right now. So trusty vice grips are always a good choice. Okay, now I'll just let the vice grips hit the engine there, so I won't have to hold them. And the vice grips are slipping, so I need to stop. I'm going to tighten this back up so I don't get this wire too twisted. And I need a much better grip on that back bolt. Okay, much tighter grip on it now. And make sure it actually breaks loose. There we go, and that's not turning, and this nut's loosening. It's exactly what we want. So now we'll remove our wire, push him off to the side just like that. So I've run into a very interesting problem here. This 13, you can tell it's loose on the socket. It might come out if you wanted it to, but I don't want to try risk stripping the nut out. So I got a 12 here. And you see, it won't even go on it. Get a 12 wrench here to make sure it's not hung up on the inside of the socket, which it's not. And this is where all the knowledge of the sockets comes in very handy. So this is a 1/2 inch, and you can see it fits it very snugly. So there is a standard bolt on this car. So 1/2 is in between 12 and 13. I'm going to try to take the starter down first and then taking the wires off the solenoid. I think I'll be able to reach it better that way. If you ever have trouble finding the other bolt, you can look at this, because some starters have 3. This one has 2. You can see if I hold it in the same orientation as it is on the car, it's just going to be up here on the side. So I'm not going to be able to get a good camera angle of me taking this one out, but now you know how to find it. You can see where I have my socket on that last starter bolt right there. I can't get a good angle on it with the ratchet. So the theory is I can get an extension all the way back here, where I can actually swing the ratchet to turn it. So this is my setup, long extension, U-joint swivel, and a 1/2 inch socket. I'm gonna put it all the way through here. Now you put a ratchet on it and take it out. And here we go. Notice how this is just a bolt and this has a stud on it, so you gotta pay attention to where they came from. So I'm gonna push them back, pull them down. I like to use a 1/4 inch drive stuff so I can't over tighten or get a lot of leverage on it. So I don't want to break stuff off. This nut is a 12 millimeter. And it's coming right off. I typically just put the washer and the nut right back on here. They typically come with new ones. And you can see this here is no nut at all. It's just a little spade terminal, so just pop that right off. And there's our starter. So I have a very unfortunate setback here at the moment. You can see our original starter here had our battery terminal and our S terminal, which is our starter circuit. This is what tells the solenoid to kick out and all that fun stuff. Go to the new one here. Guess what? It doesn't have a spade terminal on it. It's got this wire. Now, if the other one had this wire, the sticker says do not remove lead. Well, that's the first thing I do. I take the lead off and just put the bolt on it and don't use the lead. Why would I heat shrink something, whatever. The point is, this time I am going to use it. I'm going to cut this thing off because it looks like somebody has actually installed that before. It doesn't quite have that factory look. So I'm going to go ahead and try to use this. But all that aside, compare everything else. The bolts are in the right place. Starter's in the right place. The starter gear, all that. Same orientation, same diameter, nothing's really different, so this is going to work. So one more thought on this lead. Another reason I'm going to use it is if the starter ever has to be changed in the future, this part in the splice shouldn't have to be touched again. It should be able to just unbolt this, bolt it to the new starter, and not mess with this ever again. So that's kind of the theory behind that. So before I do any of that, it's going to be a 13 instead of a 12. I like to check that before I put it up there so I don't have to fight it, and so I know what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and unscrew it, set it aside, and I'm going to take this lead off, which is a 10 millimeter, so I don't have to hold the starter and try to hold it and heat shrink it and crimp it and all of that fun stuff. So I'm going to cut this off as close to this terminal as I can. So I want as much wire to play with as I possibly can get. I'm going to kind of feed it on and twist it clockwise to get all the wire to feed in there. There, it just bottomed out. I have a little bit exposed. Have my heat shrink tube right here that will go on over it when it's done. Make sure it's bottomed out and going to give it a good crimp. Give it a good squeeze, and then I always like to tug on them. See how it's not budging? It's exactly what I want. So I'm good to slide up this heat shrink here. Slide it up till it stops because it gets smaller here. Okay, get our heat gun here. I'm going to start from the back and work that way to kind of get the air out of it, if that makes sense. Kind of squish it out. There you go. You can see it shrinking. You don't want to stay in one spot too long because you don't want to burn it either. Kind of give it a twist to get around the back side of it. A little spot over there doesn't want to shrink. There we go. And there we go. See how I can see the shape of the wire and the crimp inside? That's how I know that it's fully shrunk down to where it needs to be. So while this shrink is cooling off, now we can turn our attention to this other power wire. So this is what's actually running the starter. Just want to inspect it, make sure it's not covered in green stuff. This one looks pretty good. You can use a wire brush, knock some of the stuff off of it. Or if you have a roll-lock disc, you can really get after it. Hold it from back here so I can't get cut. Don't need a lot, just need to make it a little shiny. And do both sides of it if you can get to it. So now this starter sits in here like this, which means I'm going to bolt this stuff on in this orientation and then put it up in there. So these studs pull out really easily. That's why I like to use a 1/4" stuff. Keeps me from breaking it. So they're just bottomed out, so I'm just going to go a little snug. And that's all I need right there. I'm going to start the feed of the starter up in here. Kind of. Block washer. I'm going to tighten this nut down until this wire gets to where it can't rotate anymore, just to hold it in place. And same thing as before, tighten it down, but don't over tighten it because these studs pull out really easily. So it bottomed out right there, so give it a little snug, and it's done. So now we're ready to feed our starter back up into place. So we're going to go ahead and just start this bottom bolt by hand. I'm not going to tighten it yet because I still need the starter to be able to move to get the top one started as well. Putting the bolt at a very awkward angle, starting it by hand, and then I'm going to feed my socket in here and turn the extension by hand to make sure I don't have it cross-threaded. It's going in pretty easily, so it's not cross-threaded at all. Alright, same thing, bolt is bottomed out, and then a little snug, and then that's all you need. Now it's stuck. Let go, release. Okay. And then go ahead and tighten down bolt number 2. Same thing, I have a small ratchet on it because I don't need a lot of torque on this. Just bottoming out the bolt and then just snugging it just a little bit like that. And that's all you need. And something I always like to check for too is make sure your new wire routing isn't near the exhaust manifold. This one, it'd have been alright, but I'm going to move it back up over here and kind of bend it up out of the way so it's far away from it. So now it comes down like this so it can never fight the exhaust manifold. It'll be safe here. Now I have my ground wire here for the chassis. I'm going to clean this off just like I did the other one. There you go, put it right back on. So once again, using a 1/4 inch ratchet for this bolt as well. And the reason for that, I don't want to get this super tight. Once again, if this one is tighter than this one into the transmission, it's going to do the same thing for the next guy that goes to take this out, where it takes out the whole stud and not just that nut. And you can see it's twisting that way when I'm tightening it, so I'm going to push this wire up that way so when I tighten it, it can follow the nut if it wants to and twist into place so it's not interfering with stuff, and it's not doing that, but I was prepared for it anyway. Give it a little snug. And this starter replacement is done, so now we just got to see if it works. So now I'll put the battery cable back on. Just on the off chance something's shorted, I'm going to give it a quick tap. Okay, make sure it didn't go sparky sparky, and it didn't, so we're good. Snug, can't wiggle it, tight, good. Okay, so I have it in neutral, car's still in the air, but now hopefully it should just start first try. Yeah, works good. If you like this video or helped you out in some way, feel free to like and subscribe.